This reading is an account of some of what happened to Jesus and his disciples before Easter. These verses are part of the farewell discourse that Jesus delivers to his disciples. So here we find the disciples sorely troubled. Jesus is speaking with them so as to calm their hearts, and he is showing them how God, through him, is not leaving them and that things will turn out all right. They can have hope. Hope versus optimism. In 2014, I fled a violent marriage and had to set up life on my own. I was terrified. I didn't feel equipped to live by myself, and I was concerned that he, my husband, would disregard the AVO and find me. My family and friends were optimistic. They believed that I could do it, and they helped me when I asked. But I was in a mess. I remember saying to a friend that I would just go into the city that night and find a place to stay. She was adamant that I go to her place, and so I found myself sitting, having dinner with my friend and her husband as they celebrated their wedding anniversary. I needed hope. Hope meant action, actions that I'd never done before. I went to buy furniture with my daughter, and she reminded me that I could buy a couch in whatever colour I wanted. That was too much. I'd never made a decision like that. I had to rent an apartment. I just chose one close to friends and hoped that I could pay the rent. And computers. How would I know how to set up a system? That had been his domain. Going out at night without a man by my side, I'd never done it before. It was terrifying. I was sorely troubled, and I cried a lot. It was hope that kept me going. Sure, things didn't work out exactly as I hoped, but in time they did work out. One thing I did do was go back to church. It was like plugging into a weekly hope source. Hope is, for me, the essence of my faith. So, to say that the disciples were in a stressful situation is an understatement. They know that Judas will betray Jesus, and shockingly, that Peter will deny him not once, but 3 times. The disciples had been with Jesus for a long time now, and they will have been aware of the danger of his words and deeds. The authorities, both Roman and Jewish, are not best pleased with the radical stance that Jesus is taking. They are not a kindly bunch, and it seems their patience was at an end. The disciples must have known that they were walking into danger by association. Those in power had too many ways of making people suffer, and this is stressing them out. Have you ever envied the disciples? I remember thinking how fabulous it must have been to know him and be with him, to see those miracles and generally hang out with him. Now, I'm happy to sit back in my historic privilege and read what scholars have said and take their interpretation. Also, avoiding living in a time when life was so much harder, dangerous, and short. The disciples knew Jesus, but it sounds as if this made it harder to quite believe what they were seeing, at least in this stressful situation. He was a human man. He looked like them, dressed like them, ate with them and sounded like them. They might have met cousins and other relatives of Jesus, and yet Jesus is saying that he is the Messiah. Now, they must have believed him because they stuck around, but now things are getting dangerous and they want it clarified. To calm the disciples, Jesus says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God and also in me." He then tells them that he is going to prepare a way for them. Thomas says, "We don't know where you're going, and we don't know the way." Jesus then says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." This oft-quoted statement is in response to Thomas's question. I feel for Thomas here. He reminds me of students before a big exam who just need reassurance. If we can find the words to say, if we can remind them that they have the knowledge, then they can be reassured and their confidence regained. I find that these children are the ones most engaged in their learning by saying, if you know me, you know my Father also. Jesus is telling them that they do know him and they know God. The disciples can be confident. We now hear from Philip. He asks to see God. Here we see Jesus the storyteller and Jesus the teacher. It's the teacher in him that I relate to in these verses. I'm a teacher. I've been teaching since 1977. I love teaching, and I must have taught thousands of kids. What's wonderful about teaching is seeing the results in the people I work with. I teach 6-year-olds who've had trouble catching the essence of script in kindergarten. They need to learn how to decode text, read words, sentences, and then books. Unlike the disciples, children can see all around them the application of their learning. I only have to ask them if they want to use a phone when they're bigger for them to see that they need to learn to read. I'm also the librarian in my small primary school. And so then I get to see those kids come into the library before school. They pick up books and just for the pleasure of it, read. But Jesus is talking to the disciples about the future for them that they can't understand, and the Holy Spirit that they are yet to experience. Philip's request is one that I've experienced. It's a request to make it easy, instant, and to take away uncertainty. When I was 14, I remember ducking round the corner of the school building for a quick prayer. Dear God, please let me pass this test. I know I haven't studied, but could you let me pass? Didn't happen. God had another lesson in mind. You need to study to pass the test. Jesus says, let me see God, and then I'll know that I can stake my life on what I have seen and heard from you, Jesus. Jesus gently explains why showing them the Father is not necessary. Philip has seen the Father because God and Jesus are one. Wanting an easy path is very human in my experience. The disciples are like us here. They needed to understand hope. If we want to improve things for people who are struggling, we need hope. To pray and then to work towards the goal. Maybe protest or write letters, perhaps work in kitchens that make food for the hungry, praying at the beginning and then all the way along. That's how hope works. This reading for us is a reminder. It's a reminder of the mystery in the life of Jesus. We can ask for a sign, but we need to be content to sit in that mystery. The idea that Jesus is always there for us is one of the tenets of our faith. The patience of Jesus is not just for the disciples, it's for us today. It's the reminder of the hope that Jesus brings to our lives. That hope can inspire us towards working for greater justice in the world. Our faith is a thing so precious that care must be taken with it. How do we hold on to our faith? So here we are in our time, and we have this message. And as Graham said a few weeks ago, there's no fine print. Jesus is as he said he was. So this is what works for me. I'm fortunate to have this faith, and I find that I need to look after my faith. I can't take it for granted. I can't just live in faith without community. I need to be at church. Church is a reminder, a tonic. Church invigorates my faith, and a weekly dose is required, sort of like a prescription. This space, our church, is full of that Holy Spirit that Jesus was talking about to the disciples. The Holy Spirit's in our prayers, it's in the beautiful music, it's in the clever children's story adapted for weekly reading, from the weekly reading to make it accessible for young people. the weekly reflections that somehow or another just fall into place. Also, I mustn't forget, it's in the morning teas. When we come together to chat and get to know each other, the Holy Spirit is right here among us. Jesus said that when we come together in his name, he is here among us. That's the promise. Sometimes there's a lot of mystery in our faith. That's okay. I don't need to understand it all. I just need to look after my faith. I'm here today doing just that. Amen. And from